Connor, Bryan Auchterlonie, the guest today, on your recommendation. Tell us a little bit about Bryan and why you decided to invite him on.
Yeah, I recently met Brian, and I'm kind of surprised it took so long. He's very well connected in the space and has dealt with a lot of the big boys, the big brands. He's actively working and consulting with Under Canvas and KSL, who I think is their primary shareholder now. And has also worked with and is very familiar with Collective Retreats, AutoCamp, several other projects. I've been working with him on a few projects recently, and yeah, I'm impressed by his professionalism and understanding of deal making and just money in the space. And I think he has a really interesting institutional and professional perspective on the industry, which can be rare in more of a kind of mom and pop entrepreneur space. So I think he adds a lot of color there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that institutional perspective, more maybe traditional finance background and interest that bringing to this mom and pop space, I think creates some interesting conversations. And certainly from a selfish perspective, I'm looking forward to picking his brain about certain things that I've got in mind for Posh, and so we'll get onto that as well. But yeah, I think I don't know him as well as you, but I've been going through his LinkedIn posts and seeing some of his thoughts, and he thinks deeply about the industry, and kind of he told us some of the things that he's passionate about, which we're looking to getting into as well. So I think it's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah, I would encourage the listeners. He has posted some really good articles on LinkedIn, and they're very well researched. They draw on a lot of evidence and data. I think sometimes we'll hear folks in the industry that talk a lot about, we'll say words like outdoor hospitality is all about the guest experience and like, connecting people with nature, which is obviously important. But when you're thinking about investment decisions or strategy in an industry, that can only go so far.
Sounds like you're describing my LinkedIn post there.
No, obviously it's important and it's fun to talk about, but it's easy to speak qualitatively and from a high level. And I think he adds some good quantitative insights, evidence and data driven, which as the nerd that I am, I appreciate.
Yeah, well, do follow Brian on LinkedIn, yeah, and whilst you're at it, give us a follow on LinkedIn as well. We post some interesting things from time to time, we think. But yeah, without further ado, here's Brian. Brian, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came into this business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fun journey. I started my career with an investment banking firm called Houlihan Lokey in Washington D.C. straight out of grad school, and had an extraordinary experience there for about 3 years, doing principally like sell side M&A work, right? Which is pretty plain vanilla, right? We'd represent a company, find a buyer, sell the business, and just had a just great experience in about 3 years. And 3 years felt like 14, almost like dog years. And then the great financial crisis hit, and I was laid off. And fortunately, found a small boutique investment bank, also in DC, where the exclusive focus of that practice was resort capital markets. And so I spent the years from 2009 to 2015 traveling from DC to Costa Rica, Panama, Nicaragua, Jamaica, Grand Cayman, Bahamas, Hawaii, Mexico, every North American resort destination, representing owners of usually single asset institutional resort projects. So a couple of the larger projects, we represented the owner of the Ritz-Carlton Grand Cayman, which is a phenomenal, $750 million resort. Another property in Jamaica called Half Moon, which is a stunning property, 2 miles of beachfront in Montego Bay. And so in that role, I spent all my time as an owner rep, right? So I would be the hub between the manager, capital, the ownership, and really serving as an asset manager, owner rep, solving operational challenges and also solving capital challenges for these large scale projects. Sometimes it was greenfield work. So we would look at development schemes. We would look at ground up development for resi, for traditional hotel. And one of our clients was Revolution. Revolution owned Exclusive Resorts, which is a fractional kind of equity ownership vacation rental business. And they also own a large parcel of land in Costa Rica called Cacique del Mar. And we were advising them on both projects. And they said, listen, we just took a 20% interest in this business out in Denver called Inspirato. Take a look at it. If you're interested, we can make an introduction. So long story short, in 2015, took the job, moved the family out to Denver and ran growth for Inspirato, and worked with the team about 20 to scour the globe for new residential product in really every non-Asian resort destination. So we were looking at traditional standalone VR, looking at hotels, mainly on a lease arbitrage model, and loved the experience. And what that time at Inspirato was really transformative for my own career, because despite the company's current performance, which has been unfortunate, it really introduced me to a lot of the trends in this sub-scale, alternative, non-traditional, experiential, whatever you want to phrase the industry we're talking about, right? And so what I noticed with just a lot of the consumer demands, and said, hey, if I can bring lessons learned from the traditional hospitality ecosystem to this growing area of experiential travel, I think I can do pretty well and sink my teeth in, right? And so I left Inspirato in 2018 and founded Destination Capital.
So that's interesting. So you kind of saw the opportunity that was coming down the line with this, as you say, subscale hospitality, experiential hospitality, glamping, whatever it may be. You saw that opportunity and you kind of took the leap.
Yeah, and remember at the time, there was a huge suspicion from a consumer base looking at OTAs and trying to book vacation rentals. OTAs didn't even have vacation rentals in 2015, right? They were just starting to think about, hey, how can we onboard these? How do we do it? Airbnb was not public yet. So a lot of the venture investments that we saw in the outdoor hospitality space and vacation rental sector had materialized. And so the consumers were just getting accustomed to, I can book a yurt or a vacation rental, or I don't have to stay in a hotel. What are my other options? And so this is becoming a greater and greater share of the collective consumer consciousness. And yeah, so I left in 2018 and started DeskCap, and I thought, gosh, if I can spend the next 15 years, 20 years, focused on this sector and providing professional services, maybe making some investments along the way, I think I could be all right.
What an interesting background, from one, transacting resorts and really understanding what it takes to sell a business or a property, and starting with huge properties in the $750 million price tag range, to moving to Inspirato and moving in, like you said, small scale, single units for unique vacation rentals, kind of the beginning of that wave when it was starting. Is such an interesting perspective, and one that we don't really get a lot of in this show, and also understanding both the big and the small, and then the institutional perspective. So that's super valuable. And I'm sure your site visits back in the day when you were going to Jamaica and the Grand Cayman Islands, that was a real bummer.
No,
must have been a rough life.
Yeah, no. Ask my ex-wife about that. But no, it was a phenomenal experience. I mean, careers take you on a journey, right? And, oftentimes people think, what am I going to do when I grow up? And how is investment banking in 2006 going to translate into where I am today? And, you don't know. You kind of trust the journey and make instincts and bets along the way. And I've been really fortunate to be where I am today and serve an industry that's really, really fun and growing.
So 2018, you made the leap. You founded Destination Capital. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what it does.
Yeah, sure. So when I started Destination Capital, I thought I want to be a developer of standalone vacation rental product, right? I thought, gosh, like purpose-built vacation rental product would be fantastic. And we took a project in Napa under contract, and about as quickly as I took it under contract, we of course had to deal with city officials, and my interest for development was just had waned. Let me say that. And so I said, this is really not my temperament, nor is it. It's my skill set, but not my temperament. And so we passed on the opportunity ultimately, and really refocused or distilled where I want to sit. And so I said, listen, I want to be sector specific in the resort industry. And what sectors do I want to service? Boutique hotels, outdoor hospitality, and vacation rentals. They're areas where I can add value, add experience, and overlay my experience in the traditional hospitality for how that runs and that ecosystem operates to this sector. And so that's what we did.
And you've worked with some of the big boys like Under Canvas, AutoCamp, Bailey Lodges. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the exciting projects you've worked on like that and what kind of work you've done?
Yeah, it's been really like, started the practice in 2018 and have had a variety of clients and investments that are big, small, institutional backed, not venture backed. They're all interesting in some capacity. You take away something and learn something from every opportunity. I'd say some of the highlights. There was a client of mine out of Canada who owned 4 large hotels, very conventional branded properties, phenomenal assets, but very traditional hospitality. And we're looking for feedback on how to incorporate a lot of the trends that you have on your show in the experiential world into these large resort communities. And so it spent 6 months, diligencing these properties, understanding the programming, understanding the potential for renovation, and really engage with stakeholders there to figure out, hey, what's possible and how could you potentially overlay more experiential, personalized experiences in these otherwise very, very large impersonal resorts. That was a fascinating assignment. I've had the opportunity to work. I'm based here in Denver. I've had the opportunity to work with KSL Capital Partners, the largest investor in the travel space, with 2 of their portfolio companies, Under Canvas, which is a U.S.-based glamping operator, and then also an Australian-based portfolio company called Bailey Lodges. Bailey you may know because they own Clayoquot Wilderness Lodge in Vancouver Island, and they own a phenomenal resort in Australia called Southern Ocean Lodge. And in those capacities, I was helping them identify acquisition opportunities throughout North America, and that's been that too was a great assignment.
What a fun project. And for the listeners, and I think Nick, you know more about Clayoquot than me, but it's the price point in the several thousand night range is kind of in the Amangiri threshold, correct?
It's an all-inclusive model. It's arrival by seaplane or boat only. And what they've done there is really exceptional in that the physical asset is not like the physical plant. Workforce housing, your F&B, your back of house, your guest rooms, they're nothing like exceptional, right? What makes it exceptional is the sense of place and just phenomenal food and beverage and guest service, right? They go like it feels warranted for the price points they get. But really what makes that place special is not the accommodation per se, right? The product type, but is the service and the sense of place.
Do they have, am I right in thinking they have, you have like a concierge that can help book, because they have a ton of activities that you can book onto, right? And do you have like a concierge there that will manage the whole stay?
Yeah, it's really, and the way they organize is through, pre-trip planning. You arrive, they sit down with you with a guide and say, hey, here's a itinerary that we think based on your feedback makes sense. Give us feedback. You go back and forth on it and say, oh, I'm going to do the helicopter up to the Glacier Lake this morning, or I'm going to go on a hike tomorrow, or go fishing this next day. And you really craft it based on your stay. And that's a huge differentiator in an otherwise impersonal hospitality ecosystem, right? To say, hey, we can craft an experience based on what you want to do. And by the way, if you want to do nothing, that's great too, right?
How is that similar and also different to maybe Paws Up and Amangiri?
Yeah, I'd say it's very similar. I mean, very similar sense of place. I mean, Paws Up is extraordinary, tens of thousands of acres, private land, right? Um, very much, Paws Up's very much focused on the family dude ranch experience, more so than Play Quad is family friendly, but maybe a little less so. Just in that experience, then Amangiri is just different altogether. It's not all inclusive. Um, it's about the same size, and um, is similar in the programming where they take you in and customize it and everything else.
A good friend of mine, an old roommate actually, who just proposed to his girlfriend at Amangiri like a couple weeks ago. It sounded like a wild experience.
How much money has he got?
I don't know, but he said he spent $5,000 in 24 hours. So,
well, I bet you're looking forward to the wedding.
but he's like, all right, I'm only going to spend that money once on a proposal. But
Yeah, I mean, they're exceptional properties, and they're exceptional properties, like that and more, where they cater to very affluent families and individuals, and that trend is we can talk about this, now or later, but that trend of affluent spend on travel is just increasing at an alarming rate, right?
Yeah, well, let's go into that. What are those trends looking like?
I mean, I think probably the biggest trend that you have right now is just is really affluent families, individuals looking for truly authentic experiences when they travel, right? Very few people in that income bracket want to go fight over lounge chairs on a Caribbean beachfront at 7 a.m. in the morning, right? There's no interest in that, right? They want to be heard. They want to be discreet. They want to have not an ostentatious stay at all, but things need to be exceptionally well done. And they want to know that they're being listened to in their travel priorities, whatever those are, right? And so you have a number of factors for why this is the case, right? You have one, just a massive global wealth transfer right now from the boomers to Gen Y, Gen Z, that is a tune of $84, $85 trillion that is happening right now. And so you have a massive amount of capital flowing downstream. Two, the recipients of that capital are largely millennial age, so 40 under, right? And that cohort has placed a high premium on experiences over things, right? And so when you think about travel preferences for the next 15, 20 years, right? Staying in a big box hotel with a traditional concierge desk and front desk with generic programming doesn't move the needle, right?
So it'd be safe to say that, since you took that leap in 2018 to commit to this subcategory of hospitality, everything you've seen since then has only validated that decision.
And yes, and COVID, helped it, right? I mean, you had just a massive spend in travel in 2020, 21, 22 for people who were just going stir crazy in their homes and either drive-to markets or friendly fly-to markets, right? And looking for something that was, lacked big interior impersonal corridors, room service that was dumped on your front step, right? More focused on the outdoors, more focused on just spiritual well-being, mental well-being. And those trends have largely stayed. There's been some retraction, for instance, in drive-to resort markets, ADR and RevPAR trends in the last year, but that will all come back, right? And so I think it's when you look at the trend of travel, you think of things like the amount of money spent for the eclipse on April 8th, right? And the number of rooms booked, right? You look at things like the number of room nights, and experiences that Airbnb books every year, right? Quarterly, they book 125 million room nights and over 20 billion in gross booking volume, right? So they're taking away massive market share from, the Hyatts, Hiltons, Marriotts of the world, IHGs of the world. And you're starting to see some of the brands respond in part. But there's whole ecosystems now of travel that are just more appealing to folks, with families or who don't want a conventional hotel, right?
The conventional hotels are starting to cotton onto these growing trends that don't seem to be going away. We've seen Hyatt and Under Canvas partner up recently, same with Hilton and AutoCamp. How do you see kind of the merging of those two categories happening over, the next 10 to 20 years, and what do you see that kind of looking like?
Yeah, I mean, the commercial relationships that have been announced recently with Hilton and AutoCamp and Hyatt and Under Canvas are interesting from a distribution perspective, right? So you have smaller brands, AutoCamp, Under Canvas, looking for greater distribution channels. And the way they've chosen to do this is partner with a major hotel brand, right? Historically, companies like that would just sell to that brand, right? And it would be rolled under the family of brands, and that's how it would go. The major brands now are getting, what's the old expression? They're getting the cow, getting the milk for free without having to buy the cow, right? And they're able to present
A great expression.
But in all fairness, they're able to get the inventory, right? Get the brand cachet of these growing, more experiential travel brands under their family brands, and provide that to the loyalty members, right? So it's a very interesting trend where, 10 years ago, you didn't think of the majors as necessarily the obvious choice for distribution awareness, right? Because they were more considered just pure brands. Now you have a complete transition or expansion of those brands from traditional operators to now full-scale distribution networks, right?
How did those deals work for Hyatt and Hilton? How do they make money off of that? Did they have to, pay large sums of money to Under Canvas and AutoCamp up front, or is it, it's just moving forward per transaction? Every Hilton member who books at AutoCamp, Hilton will take a percentage of that, and they just get, cash on each transaction moving forward.
I can't comment on the specific deals because they're not public, right, and the specific commercial arrangements, but the general way that these relationships work are, and very consistent, for instance, with Capital One and Inspirato, the details of which are public. It is a transaction, like per booking, commission based, that goes back to the source of booking, right? So if you're Hyatt and your member books, you may get a 10-15% booking commission out of that.
Well, we've seen this start to emerge, these partnerships, but to me it seems like that can't be the end of the road for how hotels, the big name hotels, explore this industry. Do you think this is just the start? Do you think these hotels will start to do their own kind of boutique glamping operations, or there'll be more acquisitions? Like, what do you foresee the future looking like in this kind of merging industry?
Most of these glamping operators or outdoor hospitality providers are very small, right? Their valuations surged during COVID. COVID ended, bookings continued to stay steady, then interest rates rose massively, which put a crimp on their valuation of their companies. And for the companies to sell at a valuation that's reasonable to their investors is a very hard thing for them to do right now, right? And at the same time, a lot of these companies, glamping operators who were promising, higher than average hospitality margins, higher than average hospitality lodging returns also got squeezed with higher costs. So now the performance at the bottom line doesn't look as good as it did 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so I think they're frankly a lot of the operators, the larger ones, right? The Getaways, the AutoCamps, the name brands, the collectives, the Under Canvas. Some of them are doing great. Some of them are doing having a harder time. And I don't think it's a time when majors are going to be stepping in to acquire any of them today. Now, going forward in the future, does acquiring a glamping brand make sense? I don't know. Most of these are owner-operators. They're not asset-light companies, right, where they just manage the properties. And generally, major brands are loath to invest in real estate-based businesses. So I don't see it as a business model fit necessarily for the majors. That's why these commercial partnerships, I think, are more attractive and probably more palatable for the Hyatts and the Hiltons and others.
Do you think there is, if you're a single site owner, operator, entrepreneur in the glamping space who owns one property, maybe you're contemplating doing more, but that might be ambitious. What is there an opportunity with large brands in the future for the smaller guys, or is it really only going to be multi-site locations?
The advice I give is sow your field, right? Like, what's before you and do well, right? So what does that mean? It means don't overspend on development. It means provide a great service to your customers and do so profitably. Like, that's it. Like, for a single site operator to think about the majors is so far afield, it doesn't really make any sense, right? I would, if I'm a single site operator, I'm just trying to do my best and provide a great service, right? We're so early in the development of this industry, and especially in the consolidation side of things, where I think we're going to see a lot more movement down the path of consolidation across product type, consolidation across geography, business models, etc.
Could you elaborate on what that means as far as, like, if there's a consolidation, what does that look like, and how does that happen, and who's doing it?
Yeah, think about the different kind of operators out there in the space. And again, I don't mean to ignore the smaller operators, but I'm trying to focus on some of the bigger, more household names in our cottage industry. So think of like a Getaway that's very product specific, and an AutoCamp, right? Or a Lodge Camps and Gravity House, or AutoCamp and collective retreats, Terramore, right? You think of all these kind of models. Fundamentally, what do they provide consumers? Fundamentally, they provide great access to the outdoors, right? And a wonderful experience in just great destinations. They're all still very focused, I think to their detriment today, on a product-specific type of offering, right? So stay at AutoCamp, you get to stay in a cool trailer. We have a couple tiny homes, but you get an Airstream trailer. Stay at Under Canvas, you're going to stay in a canvas tent. Stay at Getaway, you've got a wonderfully designed, RV that is on the site. It's a very great design, but the differentiator is really the guest experience and the real estate for any of these brands, right?
So what, if you're in charge of, you become head of strategy at one of these multi-site brands that's utilizing one unit type, what are you going in to shake things up, particularly on the unit type focus?
Yeah, take Under Canvas, phenomenal brand, profitable company, growing, right? Exceptional leadership, great capital backing. They can't grow in hot climates very well, right? Non-conditioned tents in Mississippi or Florida don't work, right? So you certainly have to create another product, right? Either build it or buy it to really have proper geographic expansion for that brand.
So that's very relevant to what I'm contending with at the moment with Posh Outdoors is we're not going down a product specific route. That's one of our advantages is we want our distributor has several different manufacturers that they distribute for. So we're going for a mirror cabin for our first site. The next site might be a tubo structure. One thing that we're and we don't have to worry about this just yet because all focus right now is on the first location. But obviously, the whole idea of this project that Posh is that we're going to have hopefully dozens of sites eventually. And one thing that we'll need to figure out is how we retain a sense of brand whilst being unit agnostic. We might have 5, 6, 7, 8 different types of units out all across different geographies, because the opportunity for us is all across North America with all sorts of different climates. So how does one retain that sense of brand and consistency across different climates, different units, and different products?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you'll see, think of LVMH as a brand, right? As a holdco. Think of them acquiring Belmond, right? Belmond's an operator of cruises, trains, hotels, and resorts, right? Ritz-Carlton today operates the yacht, right? Hotels, resorts. They also operate tenant camps. Four Seasons operates urban hotels, resorts, tented camps. So what you're getting as a consumer in identifying or connecting with that brand, in my view, is the quality, right? You know that there's a certain quality connected to that brand, and you know that the treatment of the destination is going to be done exceptionally well because that brand equity that each of those brands carry, right? Product is a reflection, or in my view, should be a reflection of the sense of place, right? Obviously, if you're in a warm weather environment or a very cold weather environment, you need to be hard-sided. It needs to be conditioned, right? But how well you design the product to fit on the real estate and create a real sense of place with the guest is where the magic is made, right?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I've been tossing around in my head recently is some kind of tagline, which is not ready yet, but I'm thinking about it, is, the Posh standards. Yeah, every site has minimum standards that you're getting from a Posh Outdoors site. But the whole beauty of it is the diversity of the local implementation. So it could be something like Posh standards locally implemented. And I think, that seems to fit with your view on the growing trends of the locality is everything. People want that local authentic experience, but also safe in the knowledge that they're going to have minimum standards met. So that's maybe where we're the direction we're going down. But I think it's relevant to anyone that's looking to operate across multiple climates with multiple different units.
Yeah, 100%. Say you're a developer of a tighter site that doesn't have as much elbow room, right? And who wants to be in a canvas tent where you can hear your neighbors wake up in the morning or go to sleep at night, right? Probably not the right move. So you have to have flexibility, and you have to really think of the site that you have as your canvas, and not think first about product, right?
It's super interesting because you try to look at the hotel industry and be like, oh, what lessons can be learned? But whether you're a hotel up in the Alps or in the desert, like that exterior of the hotel, the structure of the hotel is going to be mostly the same. It might have a little bit of an aesthetic finish difference on the outside or the inside, but like it's not that different when you compare it to glamping or these standalone units that can be made of completely different material. Like everything about it could be different. So it is an interesting challenge, just like you both brought up, is like how do you have a consistent brand with such different units? And I think quality is a great answer.
Yeah, I think it's exciting as well because, obviously it is a challenge to solve, but I think we can afford to be a lot more nimble than a hotel operator who, have to build with bricks and mortar. I think being able to be flexible is going to help us, but it requires some brain power to think, okay, how does it all come together in the experience and in the marketing and branding and how we pitch it? So
yeah,
it's a lot more fun.
Oh, it's fun, yeah. It's fun. I'd much rather be doing that than the flipping project management that I'm doing at the minute for the first site. It's much more fun.
Yeah, I was as an anecdote, I was with a developer yesterday, and they own a ski resort here in Colorado, and they've been a client in the past, and they asked me to look at their site back in 2019 time frame to see what kind of product would best fit there. So I went up, drove out, looked at the site, came back, here are my thoughts, and they said, okay, that's interesting. Here's what we think we should do. And I said, okay, what do you think you should do? I said, well, we're going to do part RV, part tiny home. And I said, okay, interesting. How'd you get to that conclusion? And they said, because it came organically. in the summer, we have all these Sprinter vans show up, create their own fire rings, and in the winter, they do the exact same thing, right? And so we watched the trends, and people, basically the organic trends told them, hey, we can probably make a business out of this base, at least initially, through this model, right? Now, not everyone has that luxury, right? This particular developer did. So that was an interesting use case.
Hi, friends. This is your host, Connor Schwab at Sage Outdoor Advisory. If you're launching an outdoor hospitality project like glamping, we can help. We offer feasibility studies and appraisals. What that means is we look at your specific market and proposed business offering and complete an in-depth analysis and financial projections to make sure that your planned business will be profitable. Getting a second opinion on your proposal and forecasted financials is critical to understand before you spend years of your time and hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is particularly important if you are looking to raise money for your project from a bank or private investors. They are going to want to see this type of in-depth analysis from an independent third-party specialist in the industry. We have completed over 250 feasibility studies and appraisals in outdoor hospitality in the US in the last 4 years. So we understand what it takes to bring a project from concept to reality. If this sounds like it could be helpful to you, you can go to our website, sageoutdooradvisory.com, and you can schedule a complimentary consultation with our team. Thanks. Now back to the show.
And you've worked with a lot of operators now, and I can't speak for Connor, but I'm certainly feeling like the more I go deeper with the top operators like Big Noel from Open Sky and Blake from Walden, I think you start to see the patterns of what makes the really good operators the really good operators, and that's often, the ones that we've been speaking to have been generally more, so far, one site. They are pretty much all looking at expanding, but you see some common trends among them. Do you see any common trends among the top operators that you've worked with, particularly with the ones that have multiple locations?
Yes. First of all, just an aside, Blake and Big Knolls, I've had the fortune of going to both their sites. Phenomenal location. Encourage people to take a look when they're in the area. I just think they're both exceptional operators in their own right, and have really executed those sites both well. The biggest thing I see across operators with multi-sites is they have exceptional discipline to site selection, from an economic perspective and also from a natural beauty, and one that fits their development scheme, right? So they look at a lot of stuff, right? They pass on a lot of stuff and are really patient about finding the right site that meets the brand, meets the guest experience, is consistent across the other sites, and can be developed within the economic parameters.
And well, the ones that I've spoken to, they all have some kind of scoring system or a set system that they use to evaluate properties, and I presume there's some room for deviation from that, but they've very much formulated a set of criteria through experience that they trust to find those properties.
Yeah, obviously, Napa is going to have a higher rate, guest rate, ADR, and they're also going to have higher expenses, right? So can you spend more on that? Maybe, right? So you look, every location offers different underwriting standards and different perspective on what goes into that decision.
You mentioned when we were going over kind of some pre-show notes about you're passionate about capital in the outdoor industry, and what is the right capital for a project, and I was just wondering if you could elaborate on that. So
I've spent the last 15 years talking to folks about capital, right? All resort focused. Like it's some days I love it, some days I hate it. Every day is a different challenge. Ultimately, I'm fortunate to do what I do, right? The thing I've been thinking about recently that's come to light, I think specifically in the outdoor hospitality industry, is I get calls every day. I've got a project in Arizona, it's 40 tents, and we're looking for, whatever, 30 million bucks, 20 million bucks, 15 million bucks, right? We're going to finance it. We need this much debt. We need this much equity. Here's what I'm putting in. Great. It's a capital needs request as opposed to looking at the kind of partner that you really want to partner with, right? And what you've seen in some of the larger some of the larger operators today who've taken in very institutional capital but are not yet fully matured businesses, okay? There's a mismatch between the institutional capital expectations of everything from reporting standards to profitability to leadership in some cases against what they can reasonably provide, right? And so in the travel space today, my view is that you have a very well-defined ecosystem of venture investors. You have a very well-defined ecosystem of what I'll call large cap private equity real estate investors, right? And you have this almost barbell approach in the industry today, and you don't have a lot of folks playing in the middle market, traditional middle market, which is where the greatest need is for the industry today. And so stay tuned for some of the announcements that we'll be making later this year to service that segment of the industry. But I'm passionate about partnering with the right operators, right? Who are looking for capital that can not just provide the capital and write a check. That in many ways is the easiest thing to do, but actually work through the business and help that business mature to where one point it can actually exit to a large cap, right? And work through things like management and succession and training and operating standards and all of that.
Yeah, we touched upon this a little bit with Will Spursum the other week, and I thought it was actually really interesting because he got the inside track of working with, is it Whitman Peterson that AutoCamp partnered with? And you know, he said they were great, but obviously as soon as you take on that venture or institutional funding, there are different expectations. You do have to start reporting. You do have to work with not necessarily people breathing down your neck. That might be the case with some investors, but certainly you have to be aware that you have to kind of manage upwards from that point, as opposed to being, you know, like Big No and Blake are right now, the independent operators who can basically do whatever they want. So, you know, to start with, do you have any advice on people who may be looking to get that significant chunk of institutional funding, what they need to do to A, find the right partner, and B, be prepared for those additional expectations that come with taking on that institutional money?
Yeah, and it's really, there's not many institutional folks who are, who are out there investing in the space, right? But for the ones that are, what they want to see ideally is a well-defined business plan going forward, profitable execution today, command of the market in which they operate, right? And knowing the business inside out and what makes them special, right? So I had this call this week with a longtime client of mine, and they'd asked me the same thing, like, hey, what will make us more appealing to a prospective buyer? And I said, the same advice I gave earlier, sow your field really well, right? And focus on execution, and then being able to articulate that execution through financial and operational reporting, and also through command of the competitive set locally, and why you're differentiated from that set, right? Often people get, I find operators get really focused on their project, right? Which can be a great thing, but also need to look up and see, and see the forest and say, okay, why is our project doing great? Why do we see 5% ADR decline in this product this year? Why are we seeing so much demand for food? Like, what's going on out there? And respond to those things, but also understand them, what's going on locally.
We've spoken about Blake and Big No so far, and I think they would definitely fit the definition of sowing their field, or whatever the phrase was. They started small, observed how the guests reacted to the experience and tailored it around that, really improved day on day the experience they're providing. They've since expanded, or in the process of expanding further on their existing properties. But let's say someone like that maxes out their existing site. They've got a really good, profitable business. They know it inside out. They check all those boxes that you just mentioned. Would you recommend that someone goes to an institution or tries to go to an institution at that point, or would you recommend they kind of bootstrap a second property or find something in the middle? What do you see the opportunity being there?
It's a function of fit and size, right? I mean, at some point it makes sense to say, hey, listen, I've done what I can do here. I don't know how I'm going to expand this more. I may just consider selling. That makes sense for people. or hey, I've done a really good job and I want to bring a partner in and recap my business and take some proceeds off the table. If the valuation and kind of market environment is right, maybe that makes sense. It's so project specific, right? I mean, it's hard to provide uniform guidance across different properties, but you get to a certain scale of profitability, and you become attractive. People like good cash flowing businesses always, right? In every up and down market. And so when I say like sowing your field, I really mean like, hey, like do what you can control, like produce a great business, right? And maximize what you have on the site and within your control. Generally, good things will happen.
And then they should call you and you'll help figure out what they do next.
I'll try.
And is the kind of building on Nick's question, I imagine you're much more attractive if you have 3 to 5 sites, that are cash flowing than a single site, or there's a lot more buyers or investors in that range, kind of like the barbell that you very eloquently described earlier.
I'd say yes, provided that each of those 5 sites is performing well, right? Who wants 5 sites, one of which is performing great and you've got to fix 4, right? So there was a time in the market where vacation rental operators, other startups were trying to justify the valuation based on unit or site count, right? Saying, oh, look at all this growth we have, look at everything we have in our pipeline, and kind of missed the ball or took their eye off the ball on unit level performance, right? And so those companies that tried that perspective and focused on unit count growth, you see them all. You see them in public markets, you see them privately. They're having a tougher time with it, right? And so it's not gospel that more sites creates higher valuation, right? Certainly, all things equal, you have 5 sites that are performing great, you're gonna have a lot more investors than a single site operator.
I'm assuming another thing that's pretty important, if someone's coming into this with an idea of, they'd like to be acquired, or, an institutional investor's come in and do a big investment into their brand. One thing that they need to aim for is being able to step out of the business and it runs okay without them. Like, obviously everyone starts off wearing a million hats, but presumably at some point you have to be able to say, okay, I'm going to bring someone in to run it day to day, so that if I have to disappear for 2 weeks or go away and focus on building site number 2, the first site isn't disturbed or doesn't go down the pan.
You're asking about succession, right? Like, how do you step back from the business and how do you build up a team and how do you step away from the business as founder? I think that the personalities are very different from a founder to a permanent CEO of a business, right? You've seen that in a lot of businesses across a lot of different sectors. Founders possess exceptional will, creativity, imagination, and sometimes that creates a phenomenal business out of the gates, but it's maybe not the best run operation, right? Sometimes the company hopefully matures to a point where, hey, it's a big business now. We need someone who's maybe doesn't have the charisma, right? Maybe is a little more subdued. But you know what? They can just operate the heck out of that business, right? And make it profitable and really think about the unsexy things that maybe the founder considered, right? Things like operating, things like management, things like training, where you can chop away, 300, 500, 700 basis points in a couple of years and improve profitability. Like, I think that should be the goal of every founder, right? To have that luxury to step away and say, I built something great. Now I'm going to hand it over to someone who's like a professional CEO and can just grind on this.
I imagine you have done a ton of site visits at large resorts, hotels, independent vacation rentals, glamping sites, boutique hotels. I guess, if Bryan is going to construct and, own, if you're going to develop your own glamping site, what's the ideal scenario, like as far as location, unit types? Are you coming in at the Clayoquot, ultra exclusive, ultra luxury service level, or, more standalone? Where's your head at?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I've given it some thought actually recently, and I would definitely be coastal, near coastal, right? Drive to market. The hard-sided, probably modular units, right? Limited staffing, select service, right? Clever staffing is what I'll call it. And priced somewhere in the $400 to $600 range, right?
Sounds like you want to be a posh outdoors partner, Brian.
So it's and labor is something we haven't talked about before, right? A lot of the folks who may listen to this podcast or in this niche industry of outdoor hospitality operate in remote environments, right? And so workforce housing, even in mainstream markets like Vail, Aspen, Breckenridge, has become a nightmare, right? It's expensive. It's hard to attract talent. It's hard to attract families, with young kids who have limited schooling opportunities. It's a real bear, right? You probably see it, Nick, up in Canada, in the resort markets in Banff, same trend, right? Labor, I don't care what kind of model, my dream model of select service, however that's defined, or an ultra heavy model, you have to solve for labor, right? Regardless of what tech solutions come along, right? Self check-in is, in my view, just not the right experience people are looking for. People do it all the time, but just not something I would focus on.
Interesting. So could you dive into that a little bit more? So you think self check-in is not the way. Labor is important. So how are you solving for that?
Usually with a lot of young people, right, who are really interested in this destination, right? You're solving for like a staffing model in a idealized sense is you'd have some kind of assistant general manager role, right, or maturity experience level who oversees the camp, right, and you would have a variety of hosts who are like Swiss Army knives and can do most everything around the camp, right? From provisions to guest check-in, questions, right? Emergencies. I mean, I've seen a lot of remote sites, for instance, that don't have overnight coverage and from a staffing perspective. And, when someone has an emergency, the nearest fire station or, police station is 75 miles away, right? So ultimately, I don't think that's the right guest experience that anyone's looking for. And it probably only comes to fruit when there is an issue, right? And so you've got to have, I think, ultimately to provide a reasonable level standard, competent, young, energetic, multidisciplinary hosts who can, help you with your stay, right?
I would assume the Clayoquot Amangiri thousands of dollars a night model is just incredibly hard to pull off, right? That just seems
from a staffing perspective.
From first of all, designing the site that justifies that kind of nightly rate. Second of all, maintaining the experience that justifies that nightly rate, and third of all, making sure that your staff kind of are of the quality required to hit that nightly rate. The standards must be so high that it must be just so incredibly hard to pull off.
It's very difficult. Provisioning, right? Guest access, staffing, right? Overall cost management, right? It's all very challenging, right? You've got to be an exceptionally gifted operator to be able to succeed in those environments.
So is workforce housing and manager housing, is that kind of essential for you, Brian? Is that what I'm hearing?
100%. Would not develop anything today in a relatively or remote destination without considering the needs of your essential staff, right? If you have food and beverage, you've got to have overnight accommodations for your chefs to stay in so they can start prepping breakfast and wind down for dinner, right? You've got to have a GM or something on site to manage the camp, and then a handful of other accommodations for folks.
Particularly for Clayoquot, you're your back of the house hospitality, right? You're almost running a second hospitality on the back of the house for your staff. You know, how are they, where do they sleep? Where do they eat? Where do they enjoy themselves? Like that's almost as important of a focus so that you can have, you know, the muscle in there who's consistent and well trained.
The reality is, and set aside from just again our niche industry, broader hospitality, if you cannot provide attractive staff housing, right, for families, for individuals, young and old, right, to service key positions, you're going to have serious problems operating, right? And you're going to see it in guest scores, you're going to see it in return visits, you're going to see it in nightly rate, and it's a death spiral if you can't solve for those things, right?
Who have you seen execute best? Are there any examples of someone who's really done workforce housing, or, you know, the whole process and stay of the workforce housing, who's done that well? I guess we haven't really had anyone get into any specificity about what that looks like.
It's very market specific, right? I've seen, for instance, in Big Sky, the developers of that community, Cross Harbor, Lomad Land Company, I thought had done a phenomenal job considering the needs of workforce housing there, right? They've got a special view because they're the biggest employer there, right? They're also a developer through a separate entity of a lot of workforce housing, so they can actually have full visibility into the income needs, requirements, and also the cost to develop, so they can really marry the product with rents and everything else to make it a viable solution, right? Absent that, you really have to understand, local market rents, incomes, etc. We've seen, for instance, in Vail, we've seen tenants do master leases of communities. I've got a friend who's recently developed something up there in the town of Edwards, where they had a master lease with Vail Health and Vail Ski Company before they were out of the ground, and actually were able to use those as financeable instruments. So there's a lot of different ways to skin it, right? But it's very local, and increasingly with less real estate in these high demand destinations, just absolutely critical to consider.
What's your favorite property, Bryan, that you've been to?
It's hard. I was thinking about this before we got on. I had the fortunate an opportunity to go to Egypt in 2007, and we were in the Valley of the Kings and stayed at this phenomenal property called Al Mudira, which is like a tented camp hotel just outside a lot of the the tombs and everything, and it was just outstanding. And what made it outstanding was it just captured the sense of place so well, right? I mean, in the middle of the desert, just phenomenal. And so I love that property. Spent a lot of time in my career in Jamaica. It's an island I love. Been to islands that are considered nicer or more luxury. I love the people in Jamaica. The hospitality warmth is just phenomenal. A developer, former music executive named Chris Blackwell, who represented Marley, U2, with a company called Island Records, owns a portfolio of small assets in Jamaica, and one of them is called Strawberry Hill. It's up about 6,000 feet overlooking Kingston, treehouse style accommodations. They have a recording studio in there, and folks like Rolling Stones and U2 all performed in there. Just a phenomenal, intimate, again, sense of place, great service, very unique stay, right? And then more near local, actually, something Connor, you and I talked about recently in Colorado. I had the chance to go down and stay at this Desert Reef property, and I just had a magical night there. Like the combinations of remote Colorado desert with the hot springs, I just found it was a phenomenal experience there. Really, really nice.
So peaceful.
Yeah, really nice.
Was there ever like, I guess building on that, was there ever a coolest experience that you did that was associated with your stay, like horseback riding or, archery or helicopter ride or whatever?
The experience side, yeah, I guess we did a hike on a trip to a glamping resort I won't mention that was hosted by a guide, and what made it, the hike was phenomenal, right? Beautiful waterfalls, relatively moderate hike, but in some parts challenging, good distance. But what made the hike special was the guide was our guide, young, knowledgeable guy, and along the way would stop and was very knowledgeable about everything, the flora, the fauna, the animals in the area, the seasonality, the geology. And as you wandered through the woods and up the side of the hill and the waterfalls, you felt like a lot more knowledge and understanding of the place. And of course, and then you got up there, and of course, it was like a natural cold plunge in this freezing, waterfall. And then he had, snacks and tea, and it was all well done, and it was thought out, right? It was very intentional, right? It wasn't just, oh yeah, there's a hike down the road, go take a look at it, right? And it's not to say that for other glamping operators or hospitality operators out there that you need to provide a guide and do all that. You don't have to have a geologist take you on a tour, which was the case here, but you can do little things like providing maps, providing, prepackaged snacks, providing things that are just more thoughtful, like, hey, you're going to go on this hike? Here, why don't you take this bear spray if you're in a bear? Like little things that just make the thoughtfulness go a lot longer, right? As opposed to just kind of the self-service, go figure it out.
That's super interesting because, that one of the most memorable, meaningful experiences for you, it wasn't taking a crazy helicopter ride or doing something insane. Like, it's a hike, a beautiful hike in the woods, just with a thoughtful guide, right? And I think that does show kind of the human connection and the nature connection can often do a lot of the heavy lifting if you do those right.
100%. And I hate helicopters, by the way. So I just
It's flying death traps.
Yeah.
Two common themes there, as you just said, is one is, I've used the phrase before, little touches mean the most. It doesn't have to be the big, really expensive part of the development that creates that core memory. It can quite often be Big Noel's Glamping Golden Hour, where he just makes sure that the guests are watching the sunset, or any little touch that for some reason just sticks in your head longer than 99% of the rest of the stay. And the other thing is, going back to what we were saying earlier, is that the locality is so important. That gives you a way to brand yourself outside of the specific units you use. And it's what people are looking for, really. They're coming to visit your location. I'm sure they'd love to learn more about the specifics of the surrounding area and why you're so passionate about it, because the passion transmits. And it's always fun to see people passionate about their area.
Yeah, and thinking about like constraints and what you can deal with. Like, we invested and managed a property in Sonoma County called Farmhouse Inn. Phenomenal property in the middle of the Russian River Valley. It didn't have a full liquor license. And there was no bar, right? And so instead of saying to the guest, hey, sorry, we don't have a bar, and constantly apologizing, right? The programming solution that the owners did long ago, which was very clever, was to invite local wineries on property. Local wineries got to promote their wines, right? And the guests got a bar feeling from 4 to 7 o'clock, right? And so it just created this, it was such a win from what otherwise would have been, a red strike on the guest reviews. So things like that, where, thinking creatively as an operator can go a long way.
Zach Stoltenberg told a similar story. I think they weren't allowed a liquor license, and they brought a liquor van in from a jurisdiction that they were allowed to bring liquor in from. And again, it's that you play off it, and it creates a new experience that something a little bit different.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and it's such a simple thing. It's so obvious when you say it, but I think, I wouldn't have thought of it. And
nor would I.
One of the coolest things about going and visiting a place is to get connected with local businesses, local food and drink, wines that were grown in that area. And like, I'm sure when a local sommelier or wine pourer is telling you about the story of the family and the vineyard and the seasonality, and you just feel a lot more connected with the place. It's just one more dimension to your stay.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about experiences and stays. I mean, ultimately, people, I think across product quality segmentation, so select service all the way through luxury, certainly there's a transactional stay that we all have, right? I'm a loyal Bonvoy member. I love staying in their product. I, stay at it very frequently. They're very transactional stays. I'm not looking for some transformative experiential, opportunity when I go stay at a Marriott branded product. Usually it's a matter of, again, it's very transactional. On vacation, I do want something different though, right? Generally I want something that, elicits that sense of place. Like, why am I going to go to Mendocino? What's in Mendocino? I don't know. Let's find out, right? Let's go to Sedona. Okay. And usually it's a destination first mindset. And then, okay, where's a cool place to stay, right? To really understand who's doing it best. Rarely do I pick a hotel and say, oh yeah, I want to go stay in the Ritz. Where are they today, right?
So, I mean, at the minute, there's a lot of back and forth on the US economy. Is there going to be a recession? Is there not? Yeah, I maybe this is a little bit naive of me, but I tend to believe, if you're good enough, then you can kind of fight some of the conditions. But how do you see, let's say $300 plus a night glamping operations being affected by, let's say we had a recession next year? Do you think it would pose a challenge? Do you think they'd be relatively recession proof? What would your thoughts be on it?
I think certainly there's an effect anytime you have shocks to the economy from a consumer psyche, right? You feel it in the wealth effect of your stocks or portfolio or home value, or maybe you get laid off, whatever the situation is, right? So I think it'd be naive to say no, these operations continue to go up and to the right. Not necessarily fair, but everyone across discretionary spend items like travel will feel that, right? The goal is to be a special spot where people want to stretch, even in lean times, to be a guest, right? And those are very rare. I think the good news is, as I mentioned earlier, you have a lot of favorable, tailwinds for consumer spend and travel, right? Particularly with in U.S. domestic markets, right? I think the challenge is, candidly, for operators today is pricing, right? And let's work through that. What does that mean? Going to Napa, for instance, or going to the Hamptons, or a 5-6 star market, or Clayoquot, or Hamangiri, or Paz Up, requires a small fortune, right? You're every bit of $1,000 a night average, right? And your food is about the same price. Not many people can afford that. So I think the challenge is thinking about like second and tertiary markets that can provide a similar guest experience, that are a lot more affordable, that touch a wider market, right? So, every glamping operator and their brother has jumped into like the hill country in Texas, right? Everyone's down there, right? All trying to think about, okay, is this a drive-to market with Fredericksburg and the wine country and the kind of rambling experience around there? Is this something that can provide a near-term stay that captures more traffic, and maybe Napa happens once every 5 years, right? Places like Temecula in Southern California, right? Places like Columbia River Gorge in Washington, places like Walla Walla, right? Places like Oregon wine country, places like Carolinas, right? Bentonville, Arkansas is a huge, underserved market for lodging. These are all exceptional resort destinations all of which lack a lot of good product that aren't as expensive to develop in or provide deliver the service. And I think we'll see more of those markets from not just an economic perspective, but also an entitlement perspective in those top tier markets, the Napas, the Hamptons, being more limited. A lot of these other markets are going to have a lot more traffic going forward.
And presumably your biggest piece of advice to an existing operator who's trying to, make themselves relative as recession proof as possible is to sow your own field and make sure that you're as good as you possibly can be, and you might be okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to make more hard decisions in a recession. Everyone does, right? Like, maybe everyone on the staffing side, everyone has to do a little more with a little less, right? So it really requires like thinking through what can be done. The good news is we've all just gone through a massive pandemic and try to figure out how to do more with less, right? And so I think the skill set is available to folks in the event we do face a recession. I don't suspect we will, is my prediction, but we'll see.
I don't have any more questions to add, Connor. I don't know if you do.
Yeah, if you end up doing any deals or projects up in the Pacific Northwest, please let me know, because I really want to get involved in the project close to home. So keep me in mind. I love the Columbia River Gorge is one of my favorite places.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a lot of good secondary markets and tertiary markets that I've been interested in.
I think there actually are a lot of people who I've spoken to who often ask me the question, that they're completely agnostic to where they purchase their first property. They just want to pick a good market. So I think, usually at the end we ask the guest if there's anything that they want the audience to that they'd like to pitch the audience. Essentially, I'd like to suggest if anyone is has good cash and they're looking to get into this and they're looking for underserved markets, then that might be a jumping off point to speak to Bryan. But Bryan, please let us know how people can get in touch and what they should be getting in touch about if you want to work with them or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Just deskcap.com, reach out, email me, give me a call. Easy to reach. I like helping folks on corporate finance, real estate finance matters. It's fun for me. Happy to answer questions as you're thinking about your next project. I think it's as you think about the investments or growth or whatever in this space, it's a long-term proposition, right? It's not quick money. Oftentimes real estate is the most patient capital and required, and so people should know that going in. But happy to help on the matters, and it's great to connect with Nick and you, Connor, today. So appreciate the chance to be here.
You got deskcap.com. You got that URL? That's pretty darn good. That's a hard URL to get, I'm sure. Nice pull there. Bryan, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm sure the audience knows it, but just the knowledge that you bring to the table and these insights is huge and very rare in this industry. So what a treat for people to get to have a peek inside your mind and your experience. So thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate you thinking of me.